Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the 4-Hour Work Week. Escape 9 to 5, Live Anywhere, and Join the New Rich by Timothy Ferriss. So this is one of the first books that I'm reviewing for the books back here, which are my all-time list. And there's probably no book that I have given or recommended more than the 4-Hour Work Week. Don't be scared off by the bad infomercial sounding name. Tim has said that himself in numerous interviews, that probably more than anything, it was this cover and this title that drew me to it in 2008 when I bought it. The book was published in 2007. And this is a revised version that came out in 2009. I don't know where my original edition is. I probably gave it away to somebody. But I bought this one. I saw it revised and expanded. That meant more case studies, more references. And I am glad I got the expanded version. But I'd be interested to see what I'd scribbled in the margins in the back. Because I looked and I wrote in the back of this edition as well. This book is very much both a why book and a how book. So it's preaching a philosophy, but it's also giving you the techniques and the tactics and the strategies. And it was very much before its time. In a sense, Tim had to preach a gospel before people were really ready for it. Although all the case studies in here were clear that people took what he had to say and ran with it and built businesses. In a sense, that time has passed now. If you read this, it's almost more of a historical artifact in terms of the case studies, because all of the ideas he advocates for are now mainstream. I'll give you a few. Side hustles are a good idea. That is a mainstream idea now. It was not mainstream in 2007. Remote work is an achievable ideal. That was not mainstream in 2007. Minimalism is important. Minimalism as a movement wasn't even around in 2007. Retirement is a false god. That might be one of the things that still has to fall. I think some people still subscribe to that. But those are 4 things that I take from the book that I feel he was really leading back in 2007. And that's why when I read it in 2008, it was such a life-changing book for me and has played a pivotal role in the way that I've lived my life and built my businesses. And I told you it's a why and a how book, right? So let's start with the whys. I recently had lunch in San Francisco with a good friend and former college roommate. He will soon graduate from a top business school and return to investment banking. He hates coming home from the office at midnight, but explained to me that if he works 80-hour weeks for 9 years, he could become a managing director and make a cool 3 to 10 million per year. Then he would be successful. Dude, what on earth would you do with 3 to 10 million per year? I asked. His answer? I would take a long trip to Thailand. That just about sums up one of the biggest self-deceptions of our modern age. Extended world travel as the domain of the ultra-rich. I also heard the following. I'll just work in the firm for 15 years, then I'll be partner and I can cut back on hours. Once I have $1 million or $2 million in the bank, I'll put it in something safe like bonds, take 80 grand a year in interest, and retire to sail in the Caribbean. Or, I'll only work in consulting until I'm 35, then retire and ride a motorcycle across China. If your dream, the pot of gold at the end of the career rainbow, is to live large in Thailand, sail around the Caribbean, or ride a motorcycle across China, guess what? All of them can be done for less than $3,000. I've done all 3. And once again, I think this is also something that has become mainstream. We have so many YouTube videos of people going out and doing wonderful trips on not a lot of money and showing you how to do it. That wasn't around in 2007. And so that's why I want to keep coming back to giving Tim credit for being a pioneer, someone who was preaching that this was possible and then showing you how you could do it. And all of those stories allude back to chasing this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. If I do this, then that. And what Tim doesn't mention, but he does allude to, is no one has promised you that you are going to live to be that age. I always tell people, better people than you and me have died and passed on long before they got to be the age that you say that you're going to be when you start doing these things. So it's arrogant to say when I will be blank. You don't know that. You have no idea when you're going to pass away. Only God knows. And with that in mind, why are you waiting to do the things that you really want to do in this life? Life is short. You should be doing the things that you want to do within reason. Over the ensuing days, however, I realized that everyone seemed to be discussing how to build large and successful companies, sell out, and live the good life. Fair enough. The question no one really seemed to be asking or answering was, why do it at all in the first place? What is the pot of gold that justifies spending the best years of your life hoping for happiness in the last? Test the most basic assumptions of your work-life equation with these questions. How do your decisions change if retirement isn't an option? What if you could use a mini retirement to sample your deferred life plan reward before working 40 years for it? Is it really necessary to work like a slave to live like a millionaire? And what Tim was starting to articulate, and this was one of the first books that helped me understand this, is that you could always make more money, but you cannot make more time. That makes time the most valuable commodity that any of us have. And that's why it's so important to do what you can to maximize that time. Take back that time so you can use it for the things that only you can accomplish. And when I first read this book, I remember coming to this page and putting the book down and asking myself, well, why is it that I'm working as hard as I'm working? At the time I was building a company. And the only answer I could give was, I want to sell this business and then do what it is that I want to do. I didn't know when I was going to sell the business, and in a sense, I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do. But I knew that it was unfortunate that I didn't know the answer to the question. At the time, I wasn't willing to stop and take the time to figure that out, but I did know that it was an important question, and I knew that it was a failure on my part for not knowing. And I would challenge any of you, if you do not know why it is you are doing what you are doing, or whether it's actually going to be worth it at the end of the road, take the time to answer that question. How do your decisions change if retirement isn't an option? And how could you go and sample what it is that you want to do? You say you want to retire and live in Chile. You should probably go live in Chile for 2 or 3 weeks now to see whether you will like it. Retirement is worst case scenario insurance. And I should say at the outset, Tim doesn't talk about this, but I've come to believe this and preach this a lot, that retirement is a really new concept in human affairs. We didn't really have retirement, this idea, I stop what I'm doing in my life and I go play golf and I don't have any activity and I think people are starting to wise up about that just stopping whatever it is you're doing. Oftentimes people just die because they've so wrapped up they literally die. They've wrapped up their identity and their self-worth in what they do. And so when you think about retirement, I'm going to go, work all these years and then build up a giant pile of money and live off of that pile of money, I think people are now starting more and more to see that as a foolish idea. Retirement planning is like life insurance. It should be viewed as nothing more than a hedge against the absolute worst case scenario. In this case, becoming physically incapable of working and needing a reservoir of capital to survive. And remember, working doesn't necessarily mean working on an assembly line doing physically hard labor, but it just means working in the sense of contributing to society, taking care of kids, volunteering somewhere. That's work too. Work isn't only paid. There are other things that are work, that are dignified, that are noble, that help out everybody around you, and that still give you worth even as an older person. Retirement as a goal or final redemption is flawed for at least 3 solid reasons. It is predicated on the assumption that you dislike what you are doing during the most physically capable years of your life. This is a non-starter. Nothing can justify that sacrifice. And I remember reading that the first time I read this book, and that being just a powerful, powerful sentence. It is predicated on the assumption that you dislike what you are doing during the most physically capable years of your life. This is a non-starter. Nothing can justify that sacrifice. It's as true in 2007 as it is true in 2025. It doesn't mean that you have to be deeply passionate about your work, but you cannot hate it. In the sense when I say you cannot, you should not. Life isn't meant for you. Work isn't meant for you to do things that you hate. You don't necessarily need to love it from the top of your head to the base of your feet, but you should enjoy it. Most people will never be able to retire and maintain even a hot dogs for dinner standard of living. Even 1 million is chump change in a world where traditional retirement could span 30 years, and inflation lowers your purchasing power 2 to 4% per year. The math doesn't work. The golden years become lower middle class life revisited. That's a bittersweet ending. And again, Tim is obviously talking here in developed countries with middle class or higher income. I understand that, and that may not apply to other parts of the world, but this is the paradigm he's talking about, so I'm going to stay on that. If the math does work, it means that you are one ambitious, hardworking machine. If that's the case, guess what? 1 week into retirement, you'll be so bored that you'll want to stick bicycle spokes into your eyes. You'll probably opt to look for a new job or start a new company. Kind of defeats the purpose of waiting, doesn't it? I'm not saying don't plan for the worst case. I have maxed out 401ks and IRAs I use primarily for tax purposes. But don't mistake retirement for the goal. So, what is the goal for Tim? To have more quality and less clutter, to have huge financial reserves, but recognize that most material wants are justifications for spending time on the things that don't really matter, including buying things and preparing to buy things. You spent 2 weeks negotiating your new Infiniti with the dealership and got $10,000 off? That's great. Does your life have a purpose? Are you contributing anything useful to this world? Or just shuffling papers, banging on a keyboard, and coming home to a drunken existence on the weekends? So now that he started to push you on your beliefs, then he starts to ask you what it is that you might like to do instead. Too much, too many, and too often of what you want becomes what you don't want. This is true of possessions and even time. Lifestyle design, which is a term that Tim really coined, made popular, and now there are even lifestyle design coaches and courses out there. Lifestyle design is thus not interested in creating an excess of idle time, which is poisonous, but the positive use of free time, defined simply as doing what you want as opposed to what you feel obliged to do. Here he gives a quote from Thoreau: "A man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let alone." It's a wonderful quote, something I think all of us could ponder. What would you do if you didn't have to think about money? So, again, he's not saying that you don't need money and that we can all just sing Kumbaya and not worry about things. But he's asking the question that should come in front of you're making the money, which is, what is it that you want to do with your life? What is it that's important to you? Once you've figured that out, then we can figure out how to pay for it. But if you don't know the answer to the question, what are you doing working? You're just putting one foot in front of the other, and your entire life just becomes an economic cipher. A human life is more valuable than being an economic cipher in a giant corporation transnational machine. If you don't know what it is that you want to do with your life, you don't know what's important to you, please take the time to answer that question, and then we can figure out how we're going to pay for it. Do not reverse the order. And that's something, again, I had to learn. I'm so grateful that Tim pushed me on that very early on in my journey. As they say, back in 2008. It's 2025 now. So one of the stories that, and you'll hear Tim talk about this all the time on the podcast. I haven't listened to the podcast for many years. I got everything I needed from Tim. Tim is, I think, still in search of something. He's restless. He hasn't figured it out yet. So I am no longer on the Tim Ferriss journey, but he gave me many, many wonderful tools, and one of them is the 80-20 rule. If you're unfamiliar with the 80-20 rule, that came from a botanist who was studying pea plants, and he saw that 80% of the growth came from 20% of the plants. And he started to observe that this happened all throughout nature, such that it became this Pareto's principle and what is famously down to us these days as the 80-20 rule. And so Tim uses the 80-20 rule in all sorts of avenues, which 80% of which 20% of customers are giving me 80% of headaches, or what 20% of customers are giving me 80% of revenue. There's all sorts of ways that you can think about that. How can I apply this to friendships? Who are the 20% of people who produce 80% of your enjoyment and propel you forward? And which 20% cause 80% of your depression, anger, and second guessing? And he gives three different ideas: positive friends versus time-consuming friends. Who is helping versus hurting you? And how do you increase your time with the former while decreasing or eliminating your time with the latter? Who is causing me stress disproportionate to the time I spend with them? What will happen if I simply stop interacting with these people? When do I feel starved for time? What time commitments, thoughts, and people can I eliminate to fix the problem? And this is something that I probably didn't realize when I was younger, when I was reading this in my 20s. But friendships should not be difficult or a challenge, just like romantic relationships shouldn't be. People talk about, oh, I've got to fight for it, etc. Yes, obviously, in a committed marriage, you cannot just get rid of a marriage because you run into tough times. However, when we're talking about friendships, acquaintances, jobs, the idea isn't I should have to battle for this job or I should have to battle for this friendship. If the friendship isn't easy, if it isn't bringing you joy, isn't bringing you value, you really need to evaluate whether this is something you need in your life. And I recently had a clash with previously a very good friend, and I just had to make the decision to cut ties because it became far more difficult to manage. I found myself in defense mode, having to explain things that I didn't mean, things that were misconstrued to be things that I didn't mean. And I just thought, I am too old for this. I am too old to work really hard at friendships. The idea is friendships should be easy and light, and they should bring you value. They should bring you joy, and you should be the same to them. You should bring them value. You should bring them joy, not heartache, not headaches, not conflict. That's not helpful as a friend. So he keeps going. What is the 20% of my belongings that I use 80% of the time? Eliminate the other 80% in clothing, magazines, books, and all else. Be ruthless. You can always repurchase things you can't live without. And Ryan Nicodemus of The Minimalist talks about this in terms of a packing party. When you pack up your house, either when you're actually moving or if you really just want to do it to minimalize, the idea would be only unpack what you need. And after a month, everything that you haven't unpacked, you probably don't really need. And having lived internationally and moved many times in my life, I have become acquainted with the things that you really need and the things that are just nice to haves. And so often, speaking particularly in America, we tend to accumulate many things. And I would just encourage you, be ruthless. Maybe not with one or two sentimental items. I'm a big Marie Kondo advocate in this realm to help you understand what you should get rid of. Check out her methodology and her book. I'll put a link to her book in the description. But be more ruthless. You're not going to be in your deathbed saying, "Oh, I really wish I'd kept that one thing." That's just not how it's going to be. Perform a thorough 80-20 analysis every 2 to 4 weeks for your business and personal life. I don't think you need to do it every 2 to 4 weeks. Once you've done it, I think over a period of a year where you've gotten really good at it, it's worth revisiting at least once a year and asking yourself. But I think once you've habituated yourself to it, it will come more automatically. You won't need to necessarily do it in this explicit way, but it can't hurt. If you do decide to do it, I wouldn't argue against it. Performing a consistent 80-20 analysis across your personal and professional life can only help. Another concept that I've spoken about frequently in my life, have taught to many people, is Parkinson's law. Parkinson's law dictates that a task will swell in importance and complexity in relation to the time allotted for its completion. It is the magic of the imminent deadline. If I give you 24 hours to complete a project, the time pressure forces you to focus on execution, and you have no choice but to do only the bare essentials. If I give you a week to complete the same task, it's 6 days of making a mountain out of a molehill. If I give you 2 months, God forbid, it becomes a mental monster. The end product of the shorter deadline is almost inevitably of equal or higher quality due to greater focus. This presents a very curious phenomenon. There are 2 synergistic approaches for increasing productivity that are inversions of each other. 1, limit tasks to the important to shorten work time. 2, shorten work time to limit tasks to the important, which is Parkinson's law. The best solution is to use both together. Identify the few critical tasks that contribute most to income and schedule them with very short and clear deadlines. So he's weaponizing our tendencies to our benefit instead of against us. Here's another value bomb that in 2007 I don't think was mainstream. Now we have all the research showing what Tim was talking about here about multitasking. Trying to brush your teeth, talk on the phone, and answer email at the same time just doesn't work. Eating while doing online research and instant messaging, ditto. If you prioritize properly, there is no need to multitask. It is a symptom of task creep. Doing more to feel productive while actually accomplishing less. So, since that time, there's been research which has broken this down more clearly. And when I try to explain people about why multitasking doesn't work, I talk about switching costs. So I say, for example, let's say you're answering emails and now you're switching to working on a presentation. Those are two different skill sets, or maybe something even more dramatically different. Your brain needs some time to switch to that new endeavor and give it its full attention. And as you do it longer, you're doing it faster, more efficiently. That's why if you know you've been answering emails for 30 minutes, you notice you get faster and faster and more efficient with your emails because your brain's in the groove. When you pick that up and you switch over and you try to start working on something else, your brain needs some time to adjust to that activity. That idea is switching costs. Well, if you keep switching back and forth, that means that you are never getting efficient at either task. You're just doing each task only at a certain amount of efficiency, which is not your optimal efficiency. So don't multitask, single task. Once again, I think there's a lot of research on that now that didn't exist in 2007. And I think most people realize now multitasking is stupid. And unfortunately, multitasking, particularly in text messages, leads to a lot more car accidents than ever occurred in 2007 because texting while driving wasn't mainstream back then, but it is now. Batch activities to limit setup cost and provide more time for dreamline milestones. What can I routinize by batching? What tasks, whether laundry, groceries, mail, payments, or sales reporting, can I allot to a specific time each day, week, month, quarter, or year so that I don't squander time repeating them more often than is absolutely necessary? Have I blocked out time in whatever you use? If you're a paper person, paper agenda person versus a Google Calendar person, put stuff in there so you remember to do it, and you do it in a specific time so you can do it quickly. One of the things he talks about here by email is he's very much against the checking your email throughout the day because this goes back to multitasking. Have a specific time at the beginning and end of the day when you check emails. Very rarely is it going to be so urgent that it has to be answered within the business day. Obviously, your mileage might vary, adjust as necessary, but I do believe that for most people, the checking at the beginning and end of the day is not only better for your efficiency, but will give you more peace of mind instead of always being a slave to the ping of a push notification. Another idea that Tim implanted in me very early. More is not better, and stopping something is often 10 times better than finishing it. Develop the habit of non-finishing that which is boring or unproductive if a boss isn't demanding it. And I usually pair this lesson with a Freakonomics radio episode called The Upside of Quitting, which that sometimes quitting is so, it's made negative in our society, but sometimes quitting is the correct answer. Sometimes that is the thing that you're supposed to do. And the last thing that you want to do is, I have to keep doing this because I can't quit. That's a dumb thing. That's a silly idea. Of course you can quit. Of course you can stop reading this book. Of course you can stop watching this movie. Of course you can stop eating this meal. If something is not good or productive to you, you can let it go. Give yourself permission to take control, as opposed to just being enslaved to the script that's given to you. I must finish this book. I must finish this movie. I must finish this meal. Obviously, context is everything. If you're at grandma's house and not finishing the meal would cause a disturbance, obviously finish that meal. But in most other circumstances, give yourself the agency to quit on something. And I'll put a link to that Freakonomics radio recording in the description. Now here he talks about decisions, and I'm going to combine this with a couple books and ideas. There are two types of mistakes: mistakes of ambition and mistakes of sloth. The first is the result of a decision to act, to do something. This type of mistake is made with incomplete information, as it's impossible to have all the facts beforehand. This is to be encouraged. Fortune favors the bold. The second is the result of a decision of sloth, to not do something, wherein we refuse to change a bad situation out of fear despite having all of the facts. This is how learning experiences become terminal punishments. Bad relationships become bad marriages, and poor job choices become lifelong prison sentences. So, when it comes to decisions, I'm going to talk about lean startup methodology, which is the idea that I'm going to launch something before I have all of the information. I'm going to learn from what the marketplace tells me, and then I'm going to iterate on that. I very much believe in that process in business. I even believe in that process in my personal life. If I want to try a project with somebody, let's go. Let's see how it develops, and then we can build from there. The same thing actually happened with YouTube, where you're watching this video that the Google board, when it was confronted with YouTube, they weren't quite sure. This is a long time ago when YouTube wasn't a thing. And they said, oh, I don't know. Maybe this will be the next frontier, people creating their own videos. And when they came back a week later, they were still undecided, but they decided to buy it anyway. And the principle in place was a bad decision is better than no decision. And why is that? Well, because with a bad decision, you get data and information. With no decision, you simply get what ifs building up in your brain. So a bad decision is better than no decision because with a bad decision, you get data, you'll get information, you get feedback, and you can move from there. But if you have no decision, you're either no better or sometimes worse off than where you originally were because things just continue to develop and you haven't done anything about it. So don't be afraid to make a decision that may have ill consequences because you will learn from that. And that I'm not saying, jump into every decision possible, but I am saying that have a bias towards action that will lead to more success and better outcomes in your life. Not because you're going to get it right all the time, but because getting some of those decisions wrong is going to inform you better about who you are and what your intuition is like. Do not answer calls from unrecognized phone numbers. So this is something that is an unusual practice for me. I've practiced that for a long time, but I don't want to use the word trained, but I've communicated with my friends and family that I have a bias towards text messaging and email, and I will tend to schedule calls. I do not have spontaneous calls, not only because I have a particular work schedule and life schedule. So, if you're calling me at a particular time, I don't necessarily have the ability to just pick up the phone and chat. And I don't want to create that expectation with other people. I've really changed the way that the telephone plays a role in my life prior to this book and after. And so now much more, and I think that's also developed for society. I think society actually messages a lot more than they have phone calls. And I think most people do now by default what Tim advocates for here, which is schedule your phone calls. Say, I'd love to chat with you at such a time, personal or professional, like, hey, can we catch up tomorrow at this time? Or, hey, actually, I'll put it in my calendar. So it doesn't mean that we don't communicate, we don't have conversations, and we don't talk to the people we love or business associates that we need to communicate with. It's that those things are scheduled. And we have passed the era of the phone call as a spontaneous thing. Outside of small towns, you don't spontaneously go knock on somebody's door. And so I think we've come to realize, apart from telemarketing calls, you don't spontaneously call people. That's just how it is. I'm not talking about, mom who wants to call you and chat for a while. Always pick up the call for your mother, no matter what, or your father. But I'm saying that putting boundaries in place can help you have more quality time with the people that you know and love and need to work with. Do not agree to meetings or calls with no clear agenda or end time. If the desired outcome is defined clearly with a stated objective and agenda, listing topics and questions to cover, no meeting or call should last more than 30 minutes. Request them in advance so that you can best prepare and make good use of the time together. I often will say that on some of my consulting calls is, let me know what other information I need in order to better prepare for our call. And this goes back to the idea of Tim in particular, and many, let's say, important or successful people you may know, they will get people asking, hey, could I have 15 or 30 minutes to pick your brain? And I'm sure I was one of those people when I was younger. Definitely I put up my hand and say that I was. But how you can really make sure that someone does that, I was fortunate enough to have those people say yes to me. And then they helped me improve personally in such a way that I knew how to make that question better the next time. Hey, could I have 15 minutes of your time to talk a little bit more about how I manage X and Y in my personal life? And that way the person's prepared. Or they might say, hey, this is what I always say. Watch this TED talk I gave or something like that. Come back to me with more questions. So that's what I would encourage you all to do. If someone says, can I have 15 minutes to pick your brain, to say, that's fine. What is it that you'd like to talk about? And I can tell you whether this will be a good fit for us to meet and chat and talk. So I hope that you can see just by this, I would say fairly brief review, but I'm sure it ends up being longer once I take a look at the clock, that this book has had a really big impact on my life. It's had impact on the lives of people around me. In fact, I know at least one person who started a business that is now paying the bills for his family because I had him look at this book when he was just out of college. And so I think it's a book, as I say, while dated in some of its things, because in some of its arguments, because the ideas are now mainstream and everyone gets it, it doesn't mean that the other ideas that he talks about, the ones that are not mainstream ideas, couldn't be used to help you really think cogently about your life. And as I say, going back to the key lesson, if you don't know why it is that you're living your life, then the what that you are doing to fund your life is incoherent. Those two things should be paired together. The why of your life and the how you pay for it, those two things should match. And if you don't know why you're working as hard as you are, if you don't have your life purpose put together, and obviously a life purpose outside of knowing, loving, and serving God, that's something that is incumbent upon all of us. But the idea of, in my own particular way, what is my life purpose? Then the what that you're doing doesn't make any sense. And I just want to encourage you all, if that's a hurtful thing and you think, oh gosh, I really don't know, good. Take the time to answer that question, and I think you're going to find a higher quality of life for yourself. So if you like this review, hit like, subscribe, share this video with someone you think could benefit from it. If you'd like to buy a copy of the book, there's a link to it in the description below. That's one of the ways you can support this channel. You could also send me a PayPal or buy me a coffee to thank me for the review. Send a super thanks, one of those little stickers from YouTube. If you'd like to support my work on an ongoing basis, have conversations with me about the sorts of books I'm recommending, and get some private videos that I only put out for those people, you can find Patreon or my YouTube members. And if you'd like to pick a book for me to review in the future, my Amazon wish list is linked below as well. Remember to I'm telling you to. No, if you look on the Amazon wish list, you can find different books for both this channel and my Palestine bookshelf channel. And if you buy it, you're effectively sponsoring the video, and I will try to review it in a timely manner. As always, until next time, enjoy your reading.